Hello and welcome back to Shakesyear. We are working on Sejanus' fall and we're getting towards the end. We've only got about 4 monologues left and then we're done with this one. So today we're going to get to hear mostly from Terentius with one line from Lepidus in the middle of it, because that's how this is shaking out. And we're in Act 5, Scene 10, which is a very big scene wherein Sejanus has finally fallen. We started out at the big Senate meeting that Macro had put together, and he told all the senators that they had to be there, and if they skipped it, they would be very heavily fined. And he had the doors closed and guarded, and Laco was allowed to kill anybody that tried to leave, that sort of thing. And Sejanus thought that he was going to be given all of these tribunal powers to sort of ascend to almost godlike status. But instead of that, this very long letter from Tiberius was read out, wherein Tiberius was like, you know, Sejanus has made some bad choices, and therefore we strip him of all of his titles and his powers and his position and all that. And pretty much instantly, all of Sejanus' former followers turn on him. And they're like, get him out of here, and he's a traitor, and arrest him, and blah, 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 blah. And he's like, is anybody here left my friend? And nobody responds to that. So they arrest him. They arrest a couple of his cohort. They take them out. Macro comes in and he's like, oh, this is so great. You know, I've been given all of the powers now. I've now been named provost, so things are going to be good, and blah, blah, blah. And as there were little bits where just about everybody left, and it's basically just Terentius and Lepidus left on stage, but then Macro comes back in and says all of his good stuff, and then they leave. So just before today's monologue, it's just Terentius and Lepidus on the stage, and they're like, maybe Macro isn't really that much of a better choice than Sejanus was. Like, we might have just swapped out one really horrific leader for another really horrific leader. But then Terentius comes in and says to the two of them, "O you whose minds are good, and have not forced all mankind from your breasts, that yet have so much stock of virtue left to pity guilty states when they are wretched, lend your soft ears to hear and eyes to weep deeds done by men beyond the acts of furies. The eager multitude, who never yet knew why to love or hate, but only pleased to express their rage of power, no sooner heard the murmur of Sejanus in decline, but with that speed and heat of appetite with which they greedily devour the way to some great sports or a new theater, they filled the Capitol and Pompey's cirque, where, like so many mastiffs biting stones, as if his statues now were sensitive of their wild fury, first they tear them down, then, fastening ropes, drag them along the streets, crying in scorn, This was that rich head was crowned with garlands and with odors. This that was in Rome so reverenced. Now the furnace and the bellows shall to work the great Sejanus crack, and piece by piece drop in the founder's pit. O popular rage! The whilst the Senate at the Temple of Concord make haste to meet again, and thronging cry, Let us condemn him, tread him down in water, while he doth lie upon the bank, away! While some, more tardy, cry unto their bearers, He will be censured ere we come, run, knaves! And use that furious diligence, for fear their bondmen should inform against their slackness, and bring their quaking flesh unto the hook. The route they follow with confused voice, crying, They're glad, say, they could ne'er abide him. Inquire what man he was, what kind of face, what beard he had, what nose, what lips. Protest they ever did presage he'd come to this. They never thought him wise nor valiant. Ask after his garments, when he dies, what death, and not a beast of all the herd demands, what was his crime, or who were his accusers. under what proof or testimony he fell. There came, says one, a huge long-worded letter from Capri against him. Did there so? Oh, they are satisfied. No more. So this is Terentius telling Lepidus and Terentius what's going on now that Sejanus has been taken out, and pretty much this mob has gone out with him. He's like, you're never going to believe the stuff that's happening. The same way that people will like pack into a sports stadium to see a new sports stadium, they all went into Pompey's theater and tore down Sejanus' statue, tied ropes around it, and dragged it through the streets until it's falling apart. And all of them are saying they never knew Sejanus. They never liked Sejanus. They didn't believe him. They were not aligned with him. And they're all like hunting him down almost like a dog, to the point where they're afraid that if they don't get in there to get their blows in, to get their licks in, somebody's going to accuse them of being on his side, and then they're going to be arrested themselves. So everybody's scrambling to like get Sejanus and like really get Sejanus, because nobody wants to be seen as being on his side. Nobody wants to be seen as being an ally of Sejanus. So they're all like, oh, the Sejanus? Like, what's Sejanus? Who's Sejanus? And nobody. The interesting part about this is in the end of what Terentius is saying, he's like, nobody stopped to ask what Sejanus did wrong or who accused him of it. Just this whole mob is swarming him rather blindly. Nobody's asking for proof. Nobody's asking for anything. They're all just like, just get him. And one person's like, well, Tiberius sent a really long letter against Sejanus, and that's enough. That's enough to get everybody into action, wanting to basically tear him limb from limb. That's it. That's all they need, is to know that Tiberius said some bad things about him. But they don't even know what Tiberius said. So it's interesting that he gets there. And sort of like in the monologue from yesterday, when Terentius and Lepidus were talking about how it's, these were the same exact people that were kissing Sejanus' butt a minute ago, and everybody knew he was as worshipped as a god. People were making sacrifices to him, and people were falling all over themselves to try to do things for Sejanus, and they instantly deserted him as soon as this happened. The same as you could play with them, whether or not they're reveling that, or whether or not they have some empathy for Sejanus at that point. You could also look at that for Terentius here, where he's like, and nobody bothered to ask what his crime was, or nobody bothered to ask for proof. You could play around with whether or not Terentius, just play around with his judgment of those statements. But anyway, so yeah, he says all of this, and Terentius and Lepidus are both like, yeah, that's like, he was the guy, and now he's not really, he's very much not the guy anymore. That's a pretty significant fall. They're like, what happened next? And we're going to hear some more from Terentius on what has happened after the statue has been torn down. We'll hear more on that in tomorrow's monologue. So I'll see you then. Mwah.